When a kingpin dies, the funeral tells you everything. Not about how they died, about how they lived. These are not memorial services, these are statements. Final flexes, the last time the streets will ever see the man who ran them, and the streets showed up like it was a coronation, not a burial. Custom coffins shaped like Cadillacs, 14 Rolls-Royces in a single procession, thousands of people lining the blocks. Celebrities, politicians, and killers all standing in the same room pretending they do not know each other. This is number 10 to number 1. The funeral at number 1 made international news and had city officials trying to shut it down before the body was even cold. Number 10. Rich Porter, Harlem, New York, 1990. Rich Porter's funeral wasn't the biggest on this list. It wasn't the most expensive, but it was the most painful. Rich was one of the 3 kings of Harlem's crack era, the trio that would later become the movie Paid in Full. He was 25 years old when he was murdered in January 1990 by his best friend, Alpo Martinez. He was shot and left in the bushes at Orchard Beach Park in the Bronx, with $2,239 in his pockets. But that's not what made Rich Porter's funeral the most heartbreaking service on this list. It's what was missing. Rich's 12-year-old brother Donald had been kidnapped weeks before. Alpo's crew had taken the boy and demanded a $500,000 ransom. At the time of Rich's funeral, nobody knew if Donald was alive or dead. His mother sat in the front row mourning one son while not knowing the fate of the other. Donald's body was found months later. He had been killed, wrapped in garbage bags, and dumped on a bicycle path. Rich Porter's funeral was packed. Harlem came out. But the room was heavy with something worse than grief. It was heavy with the knowledge that the man who killed Rich was someone Rich had trusted with his life, and the child who was missing because of it would never come home. Number 9. Rayful Edmond III, Washington, D.C., 2024. On December 17, 2024, Rayful Edmond III died at the age of 60. The man who made Washington, D.C., the murder capital of America, was gone. At his peak, Rayful controlled 60% of D.C.'s cocaine supply. His operation employed over 150 soldiers. He was pulling in an estimated $300 million annually. In 1991, during the height of the epidemic he helped create, Washington recorded 482 homicides. That was the highest murder rate in the city's history. Rayful's funeral was held at a local church. The service was presided over by Senior Pastor Colin Pugh. Family, friends, and people who had been shaped by his complicated legacy filled the room. Speakers included reverends, attorneys, and those who had known Rayful personally. What made this funeral significant wasn't the spectacle, it was the silence. The man who had been the most famous drug dealer in the nation's capital for 40 years was buried quietly. No motorcade, no Rolls-Royces, no diamond coffin, just a service and a burial. The contrast between the chaos of his reign and the quiet of his ending said more than any eulogy could. Number 8. Major Benjamin Coxson, Cherry Hill, New Jersey, 1973. Over 7,000 people attended Major Coxson's funeral. The motorcade stretched over 100 cars, and the man who was supposed to be there, the man who had given Coxson a silver Rolls-Royce and dedicated a heavyweight championship victory to him on national television, was nowhere to be found. Muhammad Ali did not attend because there was a contract on his life. Coxson had been executed on June 8, 1973, shot 3 times in the back of the head beside his waterbed at 4 in the morning. His 17-year-old daughter was killed. His girlfriend survived by playing dead. The Black Mafia had come to collect a $200,000 debt that Coxson could not pay. Allie lived 7 minutes away. They had been inseparable. But after the murder, word reached Allie that he was next. He fled to Chicago that month. 7,000 people, 100 cars, and the most famous man in the world, too afraid to show up. That is the kind of funeral that tells you exactly how dangerous the world around Coxson really was. Number 7. Red Top Walter, Harlem, New York, in the 1970s. This is the funeral that should break your heart. Maxine Walter, known as Red Top, was 16 years old. She was earning $300,000 a month on the same blocks where Nicky Barnes ran the council. She was known for her red hair, and grown men twice her age respected her operation. She was never arrested. The law never caught her. But at 16, she was accidentally shot and killed by one of Nicky Barnes's own bodyguards. Sammy Davis Jr. attended her funeral. Let that sit for a moment. One of the biggest entertainers in America, a man who performed for presidents, came to the funeral of a 16-year-old girl from Harlem. That tells you how powerful Red Top was and how tragic her death was. $300,000 a month, dead before she was old enough to drive. Number 6. Frank Lucas, Newark, New Jersey, 2019. Frank Lucas, the man Denzel Washington played in American Gangster, died on September 30th, 2019 at the age of 88. He was one of the very few kingpins on this channel who made it to old age. But even in death, Frank Lucas had to make a statement. Before he died, Lucas contacted a designer casket maker named Fletcher Collins. He ordered a custom coffin modeled after a Cadillac CTS-V. The casket had a sliding rooftop, working headlights, and working taillights. It had a North Carolina license plate on the back, a nod to where Lucas grew up. The whole thing cost $12,000. Frank Lucas was lowered into the ground in a car. Not a real one, but close enough that the mourners could see the headlights glowing as the lid closed. The man who smuggled heroin inside the coffins of dead American soldiers was buried in a coffin shaped like the thing he loved most, a luxury car. Number 5. Fluky Stokes Sr., Chicago, Illinois, 1986. Willie Fluky Stokes Sr. was shot and killed on November 19, 1986, while sitting in a black Cadillac limousine talking on his wireless telephone. He was 48 years old. 7,000 people filed past his casket at the A.R. Leak Funeral Home on the South Side. Mothers lifted their children above the glass-covered coffin so they could see him one last time. Fluky was laid out in a mahogany coffin with a custom powder blue interior. He wore a blue suit, a blue silk shirt, a blue tie, a blue handkerchief, and blue python shoes. Tinted sunglasses covered his eyes. A portable telephone was placed in his hand, the same kind he was holding when he was killed. The procession to the cemetery included over 100 cars. A restored white 1956 Cadillac led the motorcade. 2 cars were overflowing with flowers, some with dice and playing cards pinned to them, because Fluky was known as one of the most legendary gamblers in Chicago. He was placed in one of 8 Alcove of Love crypts inside the Tower of Memories mausoleum. He had bought those crypts for $40,000 in cash 2 years earlier after his son was murdered, because Fluky's son had already set the standard for the most outrageous funeral in Chicago history. Number 4. Willie the Wimp, Stokes Jr., Chicago, Illinois, 1984. This funeral inspired a hit song. Willie the Wimp Stokes Jr. was 28 years old when he was murdered. His father, Fluky, decided his son would leave this earth the way he lived, in a Cadillac. The coffin was custom built to look like a Cadillac Seville. It had a real Cadillac grille mounted on the front, working headlights that actually flashed, a steering wheel, and side view mirrors. The interior was lined with white velvet. Between each of Willie the Wimp's fingers, his father placed $1,000 in cash. Every finger. Diamond rings were on both hands. The funeral made national news. It became a symbol of the excess and the tragedy of the drug era. And it inspired something nobody expected. Texas musician Bill Carter read about the funeral in the newspaper and turned it into a song. He drove to the studio with his partner and said, "This is not a column, it is a song." Within 2 miles of driving, they had the lyrics. Jimmy Vaughn was at the studio, and he called his brother Stevie Ray Vaughan. Stevie recorded the track. Willie the Wimp became a blues rock classic. The opening line goes, "Willie the Wimp was buried today. They laid him to rest in a special way." Stevie Ray Vaughan performed it in concert around the world, including at a festival in Denmark in 1988. A 28-year-old man from the south side of Chicago was buried in a Cadillac coffin with cash between his fingers. And a blues legend turned it into a song that people are still playing 40 years later. That is a funeral that outlived the man in the casket. Number 3, Bumpy Johnson, Harlem, New York, July 11th, 1968. When the godfather of Harlem was laid to rest at St. Martin's Episcopal Church, the NYPD treated it like a military operation. More than 5,000 people came to pay their respects. Police snipers were positioned on rooftops surrounding the church, shotguns aimed at the crowd below. Uniformed officers lined every block. Plainclothes detectives moved through the mourners, taking photographs of every face. Bumpy's wife Mamie looked up at the rooftops and later wrote that they must have thought that Bumpy was going to get up from the casket and start raising hell. The crowd included celebrities, politicians, numbers runners, street soldiers, and everyday Harlem residents who had received free turkeys from Bumpy every Thanksgiving for decades. It was the only funeral on this list where the police were more afraid of the dead man's reputation than of the living people in attendance. Bumpy Johnson had run Harlem for 40 years. He had negotiated with Lucky Luciano. He had survived Alcatraz. He had outlasted every rival, every indictment, and every attempt on his life. And when he finally died, eating chicken and grits at his favorite restaurant at 2 in the morning, the city sent snipers to his funeral because even in death, they were not sure he was done. Number 2, Felix Mitchell, Oakland, California, 1986. Felix Mitchell's funeral is the gold standard, the one every other Kingpin funeral is measured against. Mitchell was stabbed to death at Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary on August 21st, 1986, 2 days before his 32nd birthday. He had been serving a life sentence for running a heroin empire that generated $5 million a year out of the 69th Avenue housing projects in East Oakland. When his body came home, Oakland had never seen anything like it. The service was held at Star Bethel Baptist Church. 1,800 people packed the church. Ushers wore tuxedos. The casket was carried out and placed on a horse-drawn carriage, a white carriage that looked like it belonged in a royal procession, not a funeral in East Oakland. Behind the carriage, 14 Rolls-Royce limousines lined up in a single row. 14. Every one of them polished and gleaming. The procession rolled through Mitchell's old neighborhood, the same blocks where he had built his empire, while thousands of people lined the streets on both sides. The Los Angeles Times reported another 1,000 people stood outside just to watch the motorcade pass. Black Panther Party co-founder Huey P. Newton attended the service. The procession lasted 2 hours. It began at Mitchell's former home in the San Antonio Villas housing projects and ended at the church. International news covered the funeral. Cameras from around the world broadcast the images of a horse-drawn carriage followed by 14 Rolls-Royce limousines rolling through a housing project. City officials were furious. One council member called it a mafia glorification process. Another called it hero worship of a murdering thug. A police detective said, "They're trying to martyr him, this scumbag, this murderer, this convicted heroin dealer." But the streets didn't care what the officials thought. They came out anyway, thousands of them, because Felix Mitchell had been their king. And kings get buried like kings, even when the kingdom is a housing project and the crown is a life sentence. Felix Mitchell was interred at Rolling Hills Memorial Park in Richmond, California. The headlights of 14 Rolls-Royce limousines lit up the cemetery as the casket was lowered. A local radio personality said it best. "I remember his funeral. It was like Martin Luther King had died." That coverage went out all over the country. I didn't want my city to just be known for honoring a drug lord. But for one day in 1986, Oakland was not known for anything else. Number 1, the rule they all followed. There is no single funeral at number 1, because number 1 is the rule that connects every funeral on this list. Every kingpin on this channel lived by a code. Some of them kept it, most of them did not. But there was one rule they all followed, even the ones who broke every other one. When one of us dies, we send them off like royalty. It did not matter if the man in the casket was a saint or a monster. It did not matter if he died in a mansion or a prison cell. It did not matter if he was loved or feared. When a kingpin was buried, the streets came out, and the streets made sure the world saw it. Cadillac coffins with flashing headlights, 14 Rolls-Royces in a single line, python shoes on a dead man's feet, $1,000 between every finger, snipers on rooftops, 7,000 people filing past a glass-covered casket, horse-drawn carriages rolling through housing projects. These funerals were not about mourning, they were about power, the last message the streets could send to the world. We were here, we mattered, and you will remember us. Rich Porter's mother sat in the front row not knowing if her other son was alive. Fluky Stokes was buried holding the same phone he was talking on when he was killed. Felix Mitchell had 14 Rolls-Royces for a man who died with a knife in his back in a federal prison. Bumpy Johnson had snipers on the rooftops because even dead, the police were not sure he was finished. Every funeral on this list was a contradiction. A celebration inside a tragedy. A crown on a casket. A motorcade through the same streets that created the violence that filled the coffin. But that is the game. You live fast, you die hard, and if you were somebody, if you really were somebody, the last ride is the one nobody ever forgets.